Hello Year 11, welcome to week 5 homework. Really important this week. You'll see if you look closely at the question, it's worth 16 marks, but not only that, it is worth 3 more for spelling and grammar, okay? So absolutely imperative that your spelling and grammar is good, and obviously that you're mindful of the fact that combined it's worth 19 marks, which to put in perspective is 40% of your paper. So if you're going to do well on any question, it is this question. Okay, you must do well on this question realistically to give yourself the best chance of getting a top grade. Alright, so going through a question bit by bit, it's fairly obvious. It says study all sources. Okay, so you have to combine any little excerpts from the source that have been useful in addition to your own knowledge, which is quite important, but study all sources. And as you know, it's a 16 mark question, so it's a little bit similar to the 8 mark questions on paper 1. It says the national government made important improvements in public health between 1800 and 1914. Okay, how far do you agree with this interpretation? And as you know, when it's a how far, it's agree and disagree. Okay, so however you want to set that up, it's entirely up to you, but it's quite straightforward. It's a case of just saying agree and disagree. Alright, so that bit in itself is quite straightforward. The national government made important improvements in public health. So the agreement bit is what has the government done to help public health between 1800 and 1914, and those dates are obviously carefully chosen so you stay within them. Okay, so what has the government done? What sort of acts has it put forward? What bills has it put forward between 1800 and 1914? Now on the agree bit, this is where you guys have to come up with some of the acts. Now you can obviously speak about 1848 Public Health Act, 1875, the Liberal Reform Acts, but simply mentioning those things is not enough. You've got to explain how they benefited the health of the public. Okay, if you're definitely doing the agree bit, you might disagree, but as we said, it's really important you show both sides, and you must explain how those acts or how the government interventions have helped. Okay, now the other side of that is a little bit more difficult. The disagree. The government did not help public health. Alright, did not make any important improvements. So what it's asking you is, what did make improvements? Okay, what helped public health? Because no doubt it did improve. What sort of things did help? So on the disagree bit, you can talk about quite famous reformers. You know, your Chamberlains of the world, with the model village at Cadbury's, the Chadwicks of the world, the Baseljets of the world. All these people have made a significant contribution, and obviously they're not part of the government, so it's quite important that you guys present both sides and explain the information that you use. Okay, now the question itself is quite straightforward. You must use some of the sources though. This is a really good question to show off your contextual knowledge, a really good question, but simply using your contextual knowledge and explaining it will not suffice. So fantastic that you've got that knowledge available, but you also have to draw reference to certain sources. So for example, there is a source written by Charles Booth. It would be really straightforward for you to mention that Charles Booth, in the disagreement bit, people like Charles Booth had more of an effect on improving the health of the public than the government did, and you'd simply have to say as demonstrated in source F or source E. Okay, you can even paraphrase little bits, but what they don't want you to is rewrite all of the source out. Okay, that's wasteful of your time and obviously the people who are reading it's time. It's also worth mentioning, you can annotate anything on the exam paper. Okay, you might just want to cross it out so the examiner doesn't become confused at what you've written, but you can draw something similar to this. You can have a little column, agree and disagree. It's entirely up to you, whatever helps, and obviously you make it clear that your answer is your answer. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so how would you set it out? Obviously you've got your agree, your disagree. I would find information that's going to be quite suitable for me. So I would, before I even looked at the sources themselves, I would look at how am I going to answer it. The national government made improvements in public health. I would find bits that agree. What's the government done? Write it in this bit. I'd find other bits that agree. Write it in this bit. And then I would do another paragraph. Again, disagree, disagree, disagree. And you may be looking at 2-3 points on each side, or if you've got more and you can explain them well, then please do put them in. Okay, remember what we said, this is the chance to show off what you've learned for quite a while, particularly in a 16-mark question. Okay, so I'll give you 2 minutes just to digest that information. And then we're quickly going to look at a model answer. Now the answer I'm going to show you is a fantastic example of how to answer this question. Okay, what I don't want is 30 pieces of homework that look exactly the same as this. By all means use some of the information in it, by all means use some of the structure, but please bear in mind this particular homework is 16 out of 16. This particular example is 16 out of 16. Okay, it's a very, very good example. So here we go. Like I said, this got 16 out of 16. Now if you look at it, pause the video right about here, and then you can see what sort of answer is quite good. Okay, it's a very, very good answer is this one, in fact, and it may be worth taking a few notes, particularly little bits of information regarding Public Health Acts or some of the Liberal reforms, some of the Artisan Dwellings Act. It may be worth noting these down and note just how well it explains things. Okay, so if you pause your video here and have a little read through it. Right guys, so if you look at this in detail, now you've had a chance to fully digest it, you can see obviously it's a fantastic answer, and it's really easy how it's been set out, to be fair. It's got an introduction, to some extent I agree, okay. It's not actually saying that I agree or disagree, it's just saying that to some extent I agree, and doesn't really say anything in that first paragraph, but we know obviously that's essentially the way to answer it. If you've got an opinion, that's great, but make sure both sides are shown. So we can see in this bit it spends a heck of a lot of time explaining the public health reforms. Okay, and it takes you through the public health reforms, particularly 1875, the Insurance Bill of 1911, but it also does a fantastic job of explaining why these reforms are quite important. Okay, so this being a good example, the National Insurance Bill of 1911 greatly improved the health of the public, with infant mortality rates starting to drop for the first time since 1840, and in turn led to Britain winning World War I as soldiers had greater health, which meant more could fight in the war. Okay, a really, really good explanation, and something we probably take for granted. It seems quite straightforward, but again, please make sure you explain it. And then the second bit, we've got a disagreement. So on the other hand, some people disagree, so he's not committed himself, or they've not committed themselves to say that I disagree. He said that some people may disagree with me, as individuals had a greater impact on the transformation of public health. So as we said before, your Joseph Chamberlains, your Charles Bulls, for example, we've got quite a few people mentioned here, but it doesn't stop at just reformers. It also mentions other things that are quite important. So it mentions the germ theory in 1861. It mentions that the 1848 Public Health Act was ignored, so actually it didn't work. So it ranges all over in terms of the content. Okay, and finally its conclusion. I believe that the statement is correct. Alright, it said what it thinks that the statement's correct. However, some people in this bit disagree, and all it's done is committed itself right at the end. It's not put anything groundbreaking at the bottom. Just put enforcing local governments to do things and ignore them like just in so speed. If not, then individuals and scientific discovery would have had no impact otherwise. Okay, quite straightforward in that bit. As I mentioned to you earlier, it is important that you use the sources, and it doesn't specifically use lots and lots of sources in this one, but what it does use is quite effective. So for example, the first bit, the public health in Britain was very poor, as shown in source B, with many local governments allowing the working class in urban areas to live in squalor. Okay, it doesn't draw attention to source B, it just references it. doesn't say anything about source B. Similarly, the one just down here, where it's talking about Charles Booth, mentioned in the caption of source D, showed that 35%, it doesn't really mention the source itself, it just uses those to elaborate and uses them as a bit of an entrance to impart some of their knowledge, sorry. So, feel free to have a go. Remember, this is a 16 out of 16 response. It is a very, very good one. I probably would expect a similar standard, to be honest, with the homeworks. Please make sure you've not got 3 or 4 lines for each paragraph. And good luck. Okay, I think it's quite straightforward. If you need any help, please come and see me. But commit yourself to this. It's worth 40% of your paper. And just as a last note, spelling and grammar is worth 3. Okay, so 16 plus 3, 19, a massive amount of your paper. Alright, good luck.